Okay, in this video, we're looking at problem 4, which is another monopolistically competitive industry. That's a mouthful, right? Mary and Company, and they're producing a cleaning product called Bright Clean. The company currently produces the profit maximizing quantity, but is operating at a loss. So this graph is going to look a little bit different. Now, when we think about it, if you're operating at a loss, that should tell you right away that when you draw this, your price is going to need to be below your average total cost curve. But since we know it's a monopolistically competitive industry, we know that we're going to produce at a quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but we're going to draw that line, vertical line, up to the higher demand curve. And the other thing to remember about both a monopoly and a monopolistically competitive industry is that your marginal revenue curve is going to be roughly double the slope of your demand curve. So it's going to be a steeper slope. So if your demand curve has a slope of -1, then your marginal revenue curve is going to have a slope of -2. And we could, if you look at the Khan Academy videos here, he actually shows you with math and a little bit of a calculus, I think, why that is. Or he might not even have to use the calculus, but you know, it's a mathematical reasoning behind why the marginal revenue curve is double the slope of the demand curve. It has to do with your total revenue. Okay, so we want to draw this graph, and we want to shade in the area of loss. So that's what you're going to be graded on if you get a problem like this on the AP exam. And then we want to answer a B, which is what must be true in the short run for the company to continue to produce at a loss. Now, if you think all the way back to when we were talking about perfect competition, you would remember that a company will continue to operate as long as the price is above the average variable cost. So the average variable cost curve is going to be below the average total cost curve, because if you remember, what makes up the average total cost curve is average variable cost curve plus average fixed cost. So as long as we're above the average variable cost curve in price, the firm will continue to operate at a loss in the short run. So let's look at what this graph should look like. So I've got it right here. So you can see that we've got our demand curve. We've got our steeper sloping marginal revenue curve. And we have the quantity produced where marginal cost equals marginal revenue quantity. Call that QM, and then we draw that line up to the demand curve and over, and that's going to be our price M. And then since we're operating at a loss, we know that our average total cost curve has to be drawn above the price, but still our point of production is going to be where that average total cost curve is still downward sloping. So you want to make sure you do that. Have it this somewhere in this part, but over and above your price. And then that area right there, when you draw up to the average cost curve from your price on the demand curve, and you draw in your quantity, this is your quantity you produced. So this rectangle right here is going to be your shaded in area of loss. And it's not asking you, I don't believe, for where marginal revenue is 0, but that's going to be this point right here is going to also be where you have a maximum total revenue. And where marginal revenue is 0, from this point down, you are going to be, your demand curve is inelastic, and this point up is elastic, right? Okay, so but they're not asking that, are they? Let's see. So it's saying, yeah, did not say anything about a marginal revenue being 0 here, so you don't need to worry about that. So we're going to assume some things. So we're going to assume, well, first of all, I want to just jump back here. So to answer where would they operate, what would what would need to happen? I think that's what it says. What must be true, right, for them to continue to operate? Well, what must be true, and it's I couldn't really draw it because it's just hard to draw a curve that shape. But if you could visualize an average variable cost curve, something like this, as long as that average variable cost curve, which is going to be below average total cost, but in order for them to operate, that average variable cost needs to be below the price. So it needs to be something like this, right? In order for them, because their price needs to be above that average variable cost curve. Now you don't have to draw it in, but you do have to explain that price needs to be above average variable cost. Okay, now let's go back to the next part. So we're going to assume that the demand for cleaning products increases. So in your mind, you can say, okay, I need to shift this demand curve to the right. And the company is now earning short run economic profits, which means if we shift the demand curve to the right, we're going to have a price that's above average total cost. So relative to the short run situation, how does each of the following change in the long run? Number of firms and companies' profit. Well, think about this. If we shift everything to the right, so we're going to shift our demand to the right, so we're at a point where our quantity produced. Now we're also going to shift. See, we're also going to shift. If demand shifts to the right, then our marginal revenue shifts to the right as well. So now we're at a quantity produced that's going to be higher because now our marginal revenue crosses our marginal cost right here. So we're going to end up being right here. So now our price is higher, and you can see that we're above, at this point, average total cost is still downward sloping, but we're at a point where the price, where the price is above, price here is going to be above, if I put in our price line here. Our price is going to be above, as you can see, average total cost, so we're going to have a short run profit. Now, what happens in the long run? Well, what is it? Let me go back. What happens in the long run, if we go back to that really nice graph in your book, so if we're making profits, right, in the long run, if we're making profit, we're here at D0, what's going to happen is firms are going to enter the market, and our demand curve is going to gradually shift back to the left so that we end up making zero economic profit. So if one firm or two firms, or if whatever firms are in this monopolistically competitive market, if those firms are enjoying an economic profit, jump back to where we were, are enjoying an economic profit, then other firms are going to come into the industry, because remember, in a monopolistically competitive industry, we have free exit and entry into the market. So firms are going to come in until such point that everybody ends up right here. So the demand's going to come back to about right there, and everybody's going to end up, the demand's going to come back, marginal revenue is going to come back, so we're going to end up at some point about, let me scoot this over, about right here, somewhere in here, where price equals average total cost, which is going to give us zero economic profit. And that's what will happen. Once again, the number of firms in this market will increase and profit will drop to zero. Okay, what else? In the long run, if a company continues to produce, will it produce the allocatively efficient level of output? Explain. Well, if we think back to monopoly and all the way back to perfect competition, we would remember that the allocatively efficient point is where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So if we move all this out of the way, so unclutter our graph here, we can see that this is the allocatively efficient point. Where the price is equal to marginal cost. So it would have to be way down here. And in a monopolistically, so price would have to be here. So in a monopolistically competitive market, that's most likely never going to happen, or else it would be redefined as a perfectly competitive market. Okay. So lastly, in the long run, will the company be operating in a region where economies of scale exist? And this is the exact same question we answered before. And the answer, of course, is one of the things that defines a monopolistically competitive market is that firms operate at in the downward sloping portion of the average total cost curve. So we're here, what that means is that if we were to produce more, as we produce more from this point, our cost is still going down. So if your cost is lowered, if your average cost is lowered as you produce more, that means that you are enjoying economies of scale. So the answer is yes, because we are at a portion of the average total cost curve that is still decreasing. And that takes care of problem number, I think that was 4, right? Yeah, 4.